Welcome live to this edition, well, live depending on when you're watching, to this edition of the hashtag Let's Get Louder podcast or LMF's podcast. For the first time in the history of this show, we have a real guest from out of Florida on video with us, and it is the FOF, the Fish on First creator, president, owner, moderator, whatever. He does it all. Here is Eli Sussman. Eli, how are you this afternoon?
Doing fantastic, LMF. Thank you for having me on. Wearing so many different hats over here. I could create whatever titles I want, but yeah, fortunately, with a big team around me, that allows us to accomplish everything that we get to do covering this team. And it is even under these very unique circumstances, it is a joy to have real games back to react to and to cover.
What a difference from spring to the start of the season, right? They started off slow in the spring. They kind of heated up. And then the way they started is 0-8. Oh, sorry, 0-7. Hopefully not 0-8 on Saturday. But thoughts on that, if you would like.
It's really concerning. Anyway, you look at it, the start to a season that this Marlins team has never had, and the start to this season that you look around baseball, and there are not that many teams that go over a whole week, especially when they're at home to start the season like this, where they just lose all these games. And even for a team where I think both myself and a lot of others were realistic about how there was going to be some regression based on the team that they put together this year compared to 2023, even compared to those expectations, there were some alarming things that we saw. I had concerns. I keep hammering this again and again about the team defense. And I think that was kind of the one area where you can rightfully be ticked off with this front office coming into the season, where they put together these pieces that I don't think complemented each other at all defensively. It was going to make life that much harder for the pitchers. And that's exactly what we've seen, where that defense has struggled so much, put a lot of pressure on these pitchers to get strikeouts. And when they don't, they just work a lot harder than they're supposed to. We've just seen so many different players that are underachieving at this point of the season. That's what it takes to lose every game. You need to have a lot of guys underachieving, because this is on true talent. This is still a competent team. I believe that. And as long as they, turn a corner soon enough so that before they actually have to face decisions about trading off some veteran players, I think the performance is going to improve considerably as this goes on. The worst is behind us. And I think, by any measure, that's obvious. But I do like to remind people of that, to not overreact to what equates to 5% of the entire season. It will get more watchable as this moves forward.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to lose possibly 70 to 80 games anyway. Hopefully not as many as 90, right? But it's going to happen. Let's get them out of the way now, right? But you said it there, this defense, and you guys did a heck of a job covering, and you've always hammered. This defense is just not good, and they are performing up to where you level set them. And I'm seeing a lot of regression, I want to say, from Luis Arise, actually, at second, it looks like, from last year. Thoughts there?
That's a great point. And as we're talking, the most recent game is when Arise was unfortunately the one in the middle of that. It has been almost every game that it's like a different fielder that is making the most egregious mistakes. He came to the Marlins in the first place kind of with that reputation of not being much beyond a singles hitter, and that all other aspects of his game had questions to it. And by those standards, he was an overachiever last year. He was better defensively, much smoother and more consistent than we expected in 2023. And now it's just some really fundamental issues. And the combination of him and Tim Anderson, both of those guys are offensive minded players. And to have them as your middle infield, where like, even if both of them are not terrible defenders in a vacuum, when you combine it together, it makes it a lot tougher. They can't cover for each other's shortcomings. And something that I feel like hasn't even been front and center is when those two try to turn double plays together, and how many of those result in only one out instead of two and extending innings that way. Yeah, so with the Rise, it's he set such a high standard for himself last year that it was going to be tough to totally match that. I'll just go back to what I said before, that I think over the course of the season, yeah, if not defensively, I still think at least offensively, he's not going to be hitting in the 100s. much longer, or even in the 200s. What he does on that side and all the work he puts into learning all the intricacies of being a hitter, that's going to show up, and he's going to be, as the season goes on, he's still going to bring a lot of joy to people with what he does at the plate.
Yeah, it's difficult to watch them turn that double play. If you even throughout the first week, it was almost every game they're missing one, if not two, chances to get out of an inning, and either someone's dropping the ball at first, or the ball's going awry, and or they're just not flipping it on time to each other, and that extra millisecond is counting. So yeah, it's something to watch. I agree. It's too early to panic, as many fans are, but it's just under a microscope when you have 0 wins on the left side of the bracket, or the dash, 7 losses, coming off a record-setting year for us last year. By the All-Star break, we had, I think, 16 wins up, or 14 to 16 wins, somewhere there, to come out and set a new record this, I guess, spring. I live in Florida. We only have hot and hotter, so I'll say hot season. It's rough. For the most part of this, I want to get into more about you, and we'll come back to the Marlins. Um, have you always lived in New York, or did you live in South Florida?
I have been in New York for most of my life. I was in South Florida when I went down for college at the University of Miami for my undergrad stuff, and stayed there a couple years beyond that as well. Outside of that, I was born in New York, raised as a Yankees fan from my very earliest memories. So I've been a big baseball sicko for most of my life. And but yeah, that expanded to like all sports pretty early on in my childhood. And when I came down to Miami, I still wanted baseball in my life a lot. And even though I would still keep tabs on Yankees games, that it coincided the middle of my undergrad years is when the new ballpark opens relatively close by in Little Havana. And so yeah, that was a pretty formative change. I don't know how many other new fans were created by the new ballpark. If anything, as I've learned in hindsight, a lot of former Marlins fans that like the old ballpark location have been frustrated by the fact that where the new ballpark is set up. But for me, in that stage of my life, in that circumstance, it was a lot quicker to get up there than where it previously was. And so that kind of led to gradually led to where I am now, actually covering the team.
So you were a Miami Hurricane. Congratulations. An FAU Owl. I couldn't afford nor get into in 2004 when I graduated high school. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know that about you. Um, so you were a Yankee fan growing up. In the 2003 World Series, were you rooting for the Yanks or the Marlins?
I was rooting for the Yankees at that time. Yeah, I don't remember being especially disappointed by that. Really, the one memory that is the one negative time, that was generally the years that I grew up were Yankees dynasty. That entire stretch was very privileged as a fan. And it's just that 2004 ALCS collapse of the Red Sox, where that's really the one year I would say that, and also maybe in 2001 as well, when the Yankees they lost to the Diamondbacks in 7 games in that World Series. I'd say those were the 2 years where like I vividly remember being disappointed by the season. But yeah, otherwise outside of that, it was very charmed existence being a Yankees fan, being close enough to actually go to a handful of games every single year with my family. Yeah, overall, it was a pleasant experience. And maybe that is part of the reason why I've still been so consumed with baseball ever since then, just because of, yeah, mostly positive memories attached to those seasons.
So did you graduate with a degree in this field that you're in now?
Sort of. Well, it was broadcast journalism with minors in sports administration, in mathematics, and I think I also got theater arts in there on my degree. I'll have to double check. I think I got 3 separate minors on top of broadcast journalism. And so now I do. When I arrived at Fish Stripes at the time, that was just strictly as writing stuff. So but when I really took the wheel over there, that is not coincidentally when I added all these other multimedia channels, such as podcasting and eventually live streaming, and now where we are today. So, yeah, you could say that I I do use it now, even though in a way I don't know how much of that directly was learned through school, but that's something that's always been very interesting to me, and we've certainly reached a point in media where it is so vital to be able to broadcast, even if you're not gifted with the perfect voice for it, and even if you have a even if it is trickier in some ways, but also in other ways it's more convenient. And so it's been a fascinating era to grow up and mature as when it comes to media because the whole space is constantly changing.
Did you go to school with Kyle Seeloff, or were you in different years?
He's a little bit older than me. We intersected. We didn't really know each other at the time. I don't think we had a single class together. But yeah, there was some overlap there where Kyle was very big on the radio side that they had over there. And I dabbled with it, I think my last year. And then even right after I graduated, I came back and I think I did some like volunteer stuff on the radio side as well. I didn't get as deep into that as he was at the time. Otherwise, I think we would have made more memories together. But it turns out that we know each other better outside of school than when we were in it together.
And you could always go back to, you both graduated from UM and could celebrate when they win their next national championship, which may never come. It's pretty hard in the ACC right now. They don't even get a bowl bid in football. But I don't follow college baseball, so I can't really discuss that with you. I think they're good here and there. I don't understand the format of.
Right. I definitely one of the appeals for me to like apply there in the first place was their tradition of being terrific in the major sports. And as it turns out, those years were kind of lean years when I was there. And then even since then, like the biggest highlight since then has been the men's basketball team having a couple deep runs, including the Final Four just last year. But outside of that, it's dried up from where it used to be. So that's a whole separate conversation about the college sports environment. But the yeah, I'm proud alum there. And while I was there, and then especially afterwards, upgrades that they've made to the campus have made it like a paradise, especially for people coming down from the Northeast. And there were a lot of them, like myself, that came down to want to be there. And yeah, it was perfect, I thought.
Get a taste of Miami, we'll call it
Yeah.
for you. So you get out of college. You know you want to be in this broadcasting field. Was Fish Stripes your first job out of college, or was that an extra thing just to do?
There was a couple of years in between where I was with Local 10, and not strictly on the broadcasting side. I initially had a professor at UM that worked in their sales department, and he and I got along really well. And I wanted to experiment with that for a little while on TV sales and also internet sales. That was like the big, it was doing both, but he really brought me in from the internet side just because I'd been doing, I'd been dabbling with a lot of online stuff on my own when I was going through school. And so that was an interesting experiment. That was a cool place to work. So yeah, I tried that for a couple years, but my calling was really to get back into the media side of stuff. As I realized over time, my heart really wasn't in it, even though felt I was surrounded by a pretty good group of people. And yeah, so it's been, but since then, kind of came back into this when I found on the side, I noticed that Fish Stripes kind of had an opening for people, and I had things to say about the team. And yeah, so I just dipped my toe in initially, but pretty quickly I went from just like a contributor over there to one that was calling the shots and shaping the way that the whole site was run.
And you keep mentioning this great team. How did you meet Isaac and everyone?
Everybody individually, just one person at a time. I think at this moment, the longest tenured people that I have with me might be Hector Rodriguez, who is big on our MLB draft coverage. I've been in touch with him since 2019. And then around the same time, we have a history expert in Mike Ferguson, I think around that same time as well. Both of those guys going back 5+ years are still with us. I would say that, well, some of them were already with the site when I arrived at Fish Stripes. I guess the one that I have the longest connection with might be RM Layden, where Aram was with Fish Stripes since like 2016 when he was in college at the time. And well, when he was kind of like loosely contributing, but he was the one that I think really even started experimenting with podcasting before I was at the helm. And even though like he's probably the one. I guess he's the alum of Fish Stripes that uh, among the ones that are no longer with us that I I highly valued having him around, and I think he and I kind of planted some of the seeds to what Fish Stripes would become after him. But it has always been. It is kind of rare to have anybody around for more than a few years, just because people's lifestyles change, and sometimes it's this team with its inconsistencies. People sometimes like grow disinterested over time. So I've kind of been privileged just the last few years to have so much consistency. You were the first name you mentioned was Isaac Azut, who are coming up on like the 3-year anniversary of him being here, and Kevin Barral right along the same timeline. Noah Berger, he joined late in 2021. And at this point, I should probably mention Alex Carver, who was not. He contributed somewhat to Fish Stripes off and on, but he had his own entity, of course, with Fish on the Farm at the time that predated me. Like he's been covering this farm system for close to a decade now, and he's somebody that uh, off and on, I had a lot of conversations with him dating back to like 2017. So I'd say among my current staffers, it's actually Carver who's the one that has our longest connection. For people that aren't aware, we are now like officially in cahoots with each other in a partnership going back just over the past year since going from Fish Stripes to Fish on First. But yeah, he's the one that I've of course leaned on very heavily for minor league stuff, but he has interests well beyond that. And so he and I have been we're like a married couple at this point with how long we've been around and in the same circles covering this team.
And you're dealing with multiple different personalities, and you do it really well. You let everyone get their take, and sometimes it seems a little combative between some personalities there. You do a heck of a job managing it. So you talk Fish Stripes. How did the idea, or when did you decide? You know what, we can do more. I know it was a budget issue with SB Nation or whoever owned Fish Stripes, and you said, "Hey, I want to become FOF." First, how'd you come up with the name, and when did you decide to do it?
We're right around the 1-year anniversary. It's been a little over 1 year since I had to. That was really percolating. I had thought about it before, going back with a pattern of behavior with SB Nation where it just didn't seem like they valued our coverage for one, where they just saw us as they created it as a blog, a standard blog, and they were just no appetite for what we wanted to do covering the team in person and covering it on a new level than we previously had. Um, they just didn't have the imagination that we had, and the support I was getting from them went down and down. You can almost trace it back to COVID, to be honest with you. Ever since coming out of COVID, the parent company just invested less and less in their individual team sites. They had team sites for every single major league team, as well as other major US sports league and colleges, etc. And you could tell really going back that far that their investment level was going down. But it wasn't until uh, they made it like a podcasting strategy decision at the start of 2023 that they had previously helped us set up our podcast over there, and they in one swoop suddenly just announced that almost all of their individual team podcasts were no longer going to be supported on their network as well. They even had this really obnoxious threat about wanting, if we were going to continue podcasting outside of this network, they insisted that we not call it the Fish Stripes podcast because it wasn't like they didn't give their approval to it. They didn't want to be affiliated with it. So it started with that complication about wanting to continue our podcasting, which we'd been doing for several years at that point, but also at that, not totally wanting to, not certain at that moment that we wanted to leave the network. But so they made us we joined this new network to do our podcasting called the Fans First Sports Network, and they agreed to create some free artwork for us that would be wanted to be similar in some. We wanted people to recognize that we were still the Fish Stripes people podcasting on this channel, but yet we had to make it distinct and to avoid, with respect to SB Nation, not use their stuff without consent to do so. So that's why we had to come up with this different name. I felt it was critical to keep fish in the name to in order for that recognition to be there. And yeah, so I just had some ideas popping in my mind. I asked for staff feedback as well. We couldn't land on anything perfect, and even right now, I do wonder exactly how long will be fish on first. But I felt it worked, and it allowed the audience, most importantly, to recognize who we were over there. There was that awkward couple months in between where this was all set up in about March of 2023, and it wasn't until late May where I realized we reached a breaking point with the network that in order just to make it through that season and give the people what we thought they deserved in a season that had become more interesting than people expected, that we had to do it on our own. So I had owned the domain for fishonfirst.com since setting up the podcast in March. And that's what made the conversion a little bit easier. But that entire first season, it was kind of messy on the back end side where I was developing it on my own, where I was the one like handling the behind the scenes technical stuff that previously SB Nation was doing. So yeah, that was a chaotic year, but ultimately a fun year just because of how the team was doing and all the storylines surrounding that. And yeah, when we made that switch in May, it made sense to put everything under the same umbrella. So it has been ever since then, just constantly reassessing how we're doing, really forming our own identity, but doing it with basically all the same people that were over there with me right before the transition. I'll reiterate, that's the most important part, is having the people that know what they're doing and are comfortable with each other and willing to pull in the same direction. As long as they're together, we're going to be successful, I think.
Yeah, in a way, you're mentoring these kids. Call them kids because I'm 38, and some of them, I think Kevin's 18 or just turned 19, one of the two. You're mentoring them. Do you find that difficult, or do they listen to everything? Do you guys have to get in arguments? How does that work out?
Well, without giving people too much behind the scenes stuff, I think it's a great combination of people that are ambitious, respectful for the most part, but also there are times where my staff challenges me and corrects me, and I learn from them. I think it has been really enriching to deal with them in this way and realize that you do have lessons to learn even from younger people, even from less experienced people, and from their perspectives as well. Um, and for the ones that are just really deeply interested in everything we're doing, they come up with great suggestions, and and those are things that I need to listen to. What that I realize time and time again, that things that are brought to my attention and suggested by the rest of the staff are things that ultimately are that's what the audience wants, and that ultimately that's a really successful way of doing it. So it's yeah, for the most part, it's been pretty smooth. I think I've learned over time that we've now reached a point where I could be a little bit more careful the way that I vet new candidates that come in, and make sure that I bring in people that understand exactly what we're trying to do. And what I have realized recently is that the new people I've brought in show a lot of promise as well. And yeah, so it's been I constantly learn more about leadership as I go along, but it is something that is very enriching for me. In order to seeing people get better, and just as much seeing them pursue things even outside of this, they reach a point where they've performed in such a way and put together such a resume that they're eyeing something else and something bigger that they want to do for themselves. It's been great to see them pursue that and have success with what they're doing. It's nice to play a small part in people developing their careers.
Yeah, I mean, this is your thing, right? Fish on First is yours. With their growth, you'll always have in and outgoing people. I know I've recognized that Grant is no longer part of your team. He had moved on to a different team. I haven't followed anything he does because I'm a fan of you guys, and you guys have a heck of a spring really covering this year. Going back to you as a Yankee fan, what was your first memory of baseball? And then, as a Yankee fan, what was the most special memory? Was it being with a family member watching the game? So those two questions.
Mm. I had been a fan for almost as long as I remember. So like in terms of the first memory, I think maybe I definitely remember the 98 World Series. I remember things even before that, but definitely in 1998 when they were playing the Padres in the World Series. Actually, I think this was right before it. I'll have to double check in hindsight whether it was 98 or 99. But I mean, just to skip to the, I guess the best memory of that was being at David Cohn's perfect game that he threw. And what also made that memorable, aside from the obvious, is that there was a rain delay, a short one in between that game. It was just unconventional in a lot of ways for a guy that was at that point relatively late in his career to do that. Um, so that was either 98 or 99. I think that was 99. But uh, yeah, that's one that obviously stands out because as many games as I'll go to in the future, I have to. That's likely going to be the only perfect game that I wind up going to, just playing the odds right there. But yeah, I've been to at this point. Yeah, I mean, the earliest ones of baseball were even myself playing with my brother. So I have a twin brother who, pretty early on, he didn't pursue an athletic career, but at the start, we were both playing baseball together, playing like wiffle ball in the backyard. So yeah, I remember those stuff still stick out because of how weird it was. Where we had a couple very big trees in the backyard, so it really wasn't like a ton of space as much as there could be in order to play stuff. So all the weird bounces that the ball would take off of one of the trees, and the way that the yard sloped in a weird direction, um, yeah, that will always, I think, be pretty ingrained deep in my mind, just playing around with him and my dad. So yeah, it was my dad, the one that really got us started on this stuff in the first place. He was never forceful about it. He was just somebody that, and still is, a deep, diehard Yankees fan. So that was something that, um, just very organically, because he spent so much time and energy doing that stuff, that I kind of fell into it.
So next week, the Marlins are in New York, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Will you be going with your father or family member to any game?
I'm definitely going to the first game. I will with him in particular. They they moved around the times of those. So I'd made
Oh,
those plans originally thinking it was going to be a rare afternoon Monday game. And as it turns out, I think it's going to be actually more convenient this way, that they made it a conventional night game around the solar eclipse. So we're going to get those t-shirts. Got a good deal on those. So that'll be the first game this season that I go with him for, and surely not the last. Yeah, I haven't decided whether the other two I'll be there for. We're going to have coverage in person of that series, of course, from Noah Berger. He's going to be covering all three of those games for sure. Um, so I will, yeah, decide probably at the last minute or not whether to attend one of those two. It is always an interesting push and pull between wanting to be there and getting some value from being there, but also realizing that in some ways it is easier to manage the site and oversee the staff from afar than it is from my seat and from my phone in the ballpark. So that is something that uh, I'm constantly discussing with them in terms of how we can manage things if I'm there or not. But definitely for that series opener, which should be a Jesus Luzardo start, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that very much.
yeah. You get Jesus, who's the quote unquote ace of the staff, uh, South Florida born kid. Uh, you speak South Florida. You come down for in Jupiter this year and last. I think last year must have been unique for you going to the World Baseball Classic. Was that pretty cool?
Oh yeah, that totally met the expectations. Where leading up to it, there was that sense that it was going to be taken just more seriously by both the players and the fans than it had been in the past. So the atmosphere there for I went to, I I think 4 games, at least 3 games of that, including a extremely memorable one between Venezuela and Puerto Rico. The atmosphere for that game, especially in a group play stage where it wasn't even single elimination. The stakes weren't huge at that time, but you wouldn't know it from being there. The atmosphere that people brought there, in the that really fascinating dynamic that the Marlins continue to battle with today about how there's so much enthusiasm for international games or any sort of events, big events, and yet it's hard to get people to treat the regular season Marlins games as those big event occasions and replicate that atmosphere there. But yeah, for the games I attended right there, that was awesome. And fingers crossed that Miami hosts some games in the 2026 WBC. I'll do everything I can to be back for there in that building, just because yeah, I thought it was really special what they did there.
Some big changes did occur. I'm one of those people who aren't for putting the professional athletes in the World Baseball Classic because you get the injuries that could cripple your team. Sandy's injury could have come from that, the way, whatever. But that's the fan in me, right? I'm not professional. I don't follow everything. I don't know all the rules and regulations and stuff. But yeah, I didn't go to any. I just didn't. I'd rather go to Jupiter or watch the Marlins, who were still there, than head down to the World Baseball Classic. But so we'll close this out with, where do you see, as the Marlins are playing now, them finishing?
My preseason prediction was 74 wins for them. And I think it's still possible they get there. It's just hard to see them getting over that number, just given some of the pretty clear flaws that are here. I mean, as we're talking, things are going relatively well for the injured starters, for Braxton Garrett and Edward Cabrera. Those two are going to be back in the rotation in the near future. You think within the next 2 weeks. So that looked like, coming into the year, one of the strengths of the team was the rotation depth. And I think even with obviously the massive loss of Yuri, they're going to have like 6 or 7 guys that you wouldn't mind starting games for them over the course of the year. And I think a lot that's kind of more unique than people realize across the league. But unless this bullpen really turns a corner, because I think the defense is what it is, that's going to be a liability all year. One area where I think they could improve is if some of these relievers are the best versions of themselves. Tanner Scott, what he showed last year, that would be a huge help. Andrew Nardi is in that same boat where he was incredible. And if he can get back to that, it looks so far, neither of those guys are fully replicating what they used to do. Sixto is I guess, a sort of interesting wild card. Sixto Sanchez, where to this point hasn't looked all that impressive as a reliever, but he certainly his potential is quite obvious if he is really fully healthy again, and as he gets accustomed to being the type of reliever. But that has swung several games to this point, from them going to such a clutch bullpen last year to now being the opposite of that this year. So in order that will be pretty critical, and that's something that's just hard to predict. But to this point, there's been several guys underachieving at the same time. I have to feel that at least 1 or 2 of them is going to be substantially better the rest of the way. But I talked about this on my own podcast that just came out as well, about just the difference from last year, where at least last year, when there were deficiencies on the team, Kim Eng had the motivation, and she also had some sort of prospect capital to use to make upgrades to the roster. And that's going to be a very key difference this year, where the farm system is so limited right now, and Peter Bendix has a long-term vision, where I just don't think that, even if there are areas where they could improve, and even if they can do so at a sort of reasonable price, that you're just rarely going to see any sacrifice of the long-term pieces in order to just plug holes in the short term. I think for that reason, it's a team that is more likely going to fade as late in the season than they are to actually get better in that second half of the season. So there are those massive decisions are coming up in terms of trade candidates that they have, where they at least listened on some pretty major trades this offseason with Jesus Luzardo, even with Edward Cabrera and others. And if the team this year is not going to be pretty comfortably in the postseason hunts, then you think that Bendix is going to be compelled to pull the trigger on some of those deals while guys still have a lot of value on the market. So yeah, again, it is really premature to talk about trade deadline stuff, but that is definitely the direction they're headed in is being a team that listens really closely and that may sell some of these core pieces if they aren't able to extend them moving forward. So yeah, that is we're at this time of year where once the season gets underway, you very rarely see big contract extensions. That stuff usually happens before the season. The fact that that hasn't happened, yeah, it leads me to think that you're going to see some uncomfortable, but ultimately long-term focused trades as the year goes on. And yeah, I think it's not going to be quite the same as last year. I'm kind of sticking with my general preseason feeling that this team took a step back this year. Doesn't necessarily have to be a full blow it up rebuild, but yeah, it's just it's the at the very highest levels of this organization. They're not chasing one postseason berth right now the way that they were last year, and um, I understand why a lot of fans are a little ticked off by that.
As a fan, I get it. I kind of liked our team. Thought that they had good pieces in place. They got Tim Anderson. We didn't have a shortstop last year. Purdy, Joey Wendell, right? And you bring in Tim Anderson, who had a down year, looking for him to get better or get back to somewhat of what he was younger in his career. And he's done pretty good for the start. But we know he won't be here next year. We know Bell won't be here next year. So we'll have our new first baseman. I was very surprised in the Amaya trade because you didn't expect that. He was what, their ninth prospect, I think you guys had him as, or maybe you have him at seventh, or nationally they had him at ninth. And then he's gone. So who in the system would they have at short now? That may be a Carver question, but I don't see anybody at shortstop.
Yeah, it's baffling where they are at that critical position, where it does seem beyond this year to be just a wide open thing. That is, yeah, there's not an imminent internal solution right there. It is expensive to go outside the organization and acquire a very good shortstop as well. So that was this past offseason, there just weren't. Well, the last two off seasons, that's been a pretty big storyline. What are they going to do at shortstop? And they did basically nothing entering the 2023 season. They somehow reached one of their goals to make to the postseason, even without doing without that being a big liability with the team. And right now, they got one of the more interesting guys that were available on the free agent market in Tim Anderson. But unless he has a really surprising resurgence, I don't think that is somebody they'll look at as a long-term solution either. So it's going to be a really big decision that typically either takes big time prospects to trade away or a big investment in free agency that this organization simply doesn't do, hasn't done in like 12 years since like a Jose Reyes signing. But that is under this ownership group. It's a fascinating, it's one of the main, one of several big questions hanging over the long-term situation of this franchise. But I don't think the shortstop of the future is in the organization right now. They're kind of starting from scratch there.
And you could follow those listening. You could follow all those news and all the news of the Miami Marlins at fishonfirst.com. They do a heck of a job covering the South Florida baseball team from top to bottom, high to low. You could become a super subscriber for just $4 a month at minimum. Give them whatever you can, but at minimum $4, you get first speaking on their spaces on Twitter or X, however you would call it. They post more or less their subscribers stuff on the what do you guys call it before the games? I'm sorry. What are your pregame shows called?
We have a Fish on First Live, where leading to every series opener, where we do prediction time, and that's where our staff and our super subs compete against each other in order to predict that stuff, win or lose. That's what I like, doing something that's independent of the team's success, where if you want to be negative, you can be negative, and we keep track of that all season long. And at the end of the year, giving away really nice throwback jacket to whoever has the most prediction time points as well. We'll do giveaways throughout the year that are focused on just our super subs, give them opportunity to enter those. And yeah, so we have a whole section on our website too that is devoted to them, that for people to check out, that we keep updated throughout the entire year. Yeah, we appreciate everybody that really, just by anything that you do to follow our coverage helps a lot. But yeah, that is so valuable to have people that are super subs as well, all throughout the year, because we do keep this coverage going all throughout the year, even during the off season as well. That it makes it possible to do what we want to do, to cover games on the road, to cover all the games at home that we do with multiple people at the same time. Yeah, it takes some resources to make that possible. And yeah, we're very proud to be one of the few outlets that is able to make that possible and bring info and access and entertainment to fans in a way that is, I think, is really valuable.
And where can those who are listening find you to listen or hear what you have to put out?
Well, me individually, anywhere you look for Fish on First, I'm either doing it directly or overseeing it. But yeah, for me personally, you can find me on Twitter. I'll always call it Twitter at Real Eli, Real ELY. So yeah, you can find me there, but you can find me posting on the site a whole lot too on fishonfirst.com. A lot of those articles are myself as well. So you could just click on my author name and check out what I'm up to as well.
And you guys have gotten some new sponsors this year. That's pretty cool. Burger and Burger sponsoring you, and some others. But I have my own sponsors, and that would be the ones who have sponsored this episode. And that is intheclutch.com, the only outlet for apparel of the Let's Get Louder podcast, MLB approved t-shirts. And by using code LMF at checkout, you save a percentage or a discount off your entire cart. So go check out intheclutch.com/LMF or intheclutch.com/Miami to see all the South Florida sports t-shirts available to you. Eli, thank you for joining. You are the first ever official guest on the hashtag Let's Get Louder. Can I get a Let's Get Louder from you?
Let's get louder.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, LMF.
Have a great day. Thank you for joining.